Good evening, good evening, good evening, everybody, and welcome to an excellent episode of the Lavigne Show. Because boy, do I have the guest for you today, because we need to have this conversation, Canada and America. Nice to see you all. Look, the only word that comes to my mind quickly is embarrassed. As a Canadian, I am embarrassed about what's happened to the Canada-US relations because, quite frankly, it's not America's fault. It's Canada's fault. Our leaders and even our sports teams and fans and a lot of people that you would look at and kind of look up to starting to let us down. I'm very embarrassed. We shouldn't be having these kind of troubles with our American friends. And look, it's not like we didn't know this was going to happen. Last time I had Dr. Malone on, and he's back here today, I had him just before the election, actually election day. He came on and we were chatting with some of our other American friends about the state of Canada, US relations, even at that time. And I was one of the ones that highlighted that I think Canada has become a national security concern for the US because we are. We have porous borders. May not be a lot of people crossing, but there's certainly drugs and sex trafficking, weapons. So yeah, I actually identified back then that, oh my gosh, like I think Canada is going to be declared as a national security concern for the US. And lo and behold, some of the first talking points out of Trump after he won was exactly that. Canada, clean up your border. We want to be good neighbors, don't we? And then look what happened. He gets into power. He starts pushing that issue, starts calling our leader at the time, because it's changed now, we'll get into that, governor. Those are indications that maybe you guys should fix up or they're going to help out. And then what did we respond with? Our leaders? Let's go to war, dollar for dollar. Let's go and attack them and not even address the base concern of security. We are absolutely a threat to the US. Trump is not wrong about that. You don't have to be a rocket scientist like Elon to discover that, yeah, sure enough, we are a place where terrorism does grow and it becomes a threat to many countries, not just the US. So I'm very disappointed that Canada's response to Trump's recommendation to go ahead and clean up our border was to not do it, other than Alberta. So we'll give Danielle Smith a little bit of credit. She did send some sheriffs down there. She is taking it a little bit more serious than other provinces. But the other ones, like Doug Ford, said, let's go to fight. So what I decided to do is bring some of my American friends, old and new, to the show and have a conversation about it. So Dr. Malone came back because kind of started that conversation back in November. I also got Michael Yon, who's a geopolitical war analyst down in Pamina. He's back to share some more of his insights. Because why are we doing this? Is it really just a trade war, or is it something a little bit bigger? Does Trump really want to take over Canada, or does he want us to grow up and become independent? The rhetoric around Greenland's kind of changed a little bit from annexing them to, hey, you guys should be independent. I think the similar messaging should be for Canada. But why are we going to put our lives on the line here? And the reason why I say our lives is Denny Rancourt provided a lot of information at the Injection of Truth just last week that shows a correlation, which means cousin, it happens, correlation between our job market, our oil prices, and our trade, and the amount of suicides and deaths and drug overdoses. When our market goes down, when we are depressed in this country, we die. So this is going to kill Canadians. So I'm very, very concerned. We need to have this conversation, and we should be working a lot better with our neighbors. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring in Dr. Malone. Good evening, my friend. How are you doing?
Hi, Jason. It's interesting to hear your point of view. I hadn't really been attuned to Canada and the border issues because there's been so much else going on. And in particular, everybody wants me to comment about Bobby and HHS. So I guess I'm guilty of not having paid enough attention to my friends up north. I
Not a
do know,
problem.
Jason, that there will be a CPAC Canada that's being organized now. So that's big news.
That's right. And you were at CPAC, and you did a great job presenting your position. And yes, that was a lot about Robert Kennedy and make America healthy again. And that's a very important issue. But your security is also important. And this is something that we spoke about briefly when you were last on, that I was concerned that we are a security threat to you. And then lo and behold, a lot of you agreed.
Yeah, so it's interesting times. Politically, Canada is challenged. You're very much still in the WEF world of Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau and and the young leaders and that globalist frame of reference. And I don't know what it's going to take to shake you out of that.
Well, let me take it one step further, Dr. Malone. We just got Mark Carney. He's now the leader of the Liberal Party, who's now the de facto Prime Minister of Canada, and he's on the founding board of the WEF. He doesn't even hide this, and he uses this as a bit of a badge. Because he's saying, as a globalist, and this is his rhetoric, as a globalist, only he knows how to deal with Trump. How scary is that?
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it's going to ring true. We'll see how that plays out, but I don't think that's going to impress Mr. Trump very much.
No, I think if anything, it should cause him a lot more concern, because now maybe he's going to use those globalist ties, maybe the banking ties, because they're everywhere, and maybe pull some strings that are not favorable to anybody in this particular issue. Michael, thank you very much for joining again. I really appreciate that. You're out in the jungle doing hard work. And this is a conversation we've had as well, the security of the US and Canada, our border, and how many issues you've identified along that border.
Oh, thanks for having me on. And hello, Dr. Malone. Yeah, this is quite interesting. I went to Canada last year with Masako Ganaha to look at the border issues and other issues up there. We went from, well, actually, we left Panama here looking at border and canal issues. And then we went to Bahamas to look at border and China issues there as well, because China has built a large port right off the Florida coast. And that is basically our fourth border is Bahamas. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of Chinese come through the Bahamas and others. And then from Bahamas, we went up to Canada, spent more than a month there looking at it from coast to coast, from Toronto up to Yellowknife, which you know where that is, of course. And then we went over to Vancouver and went to that Chinese police station and saw many things. And then from there, we continued to look at these issues in other countries like Thailand and Taiwan and Japan. And I mean, Masako and I have gone to 30 countries exactly in the last 4 years looking at this issue all across the United States. I went across the entire U.S. southern border. That took months, from SpaceX to San Diego. Some of that was on the Mexican side, all the American side. I've been to every country from Colombia all the way up through Central America to Yellowknife, looking at this issue, right? We're quite knowledgeable about it. We were just down in Argentina for 2 months looking at the same issues. What I'm getting to with this is you can't understand what's going on without context, right? You know, like the doctors who used to do house calls and they could, you know, see things that the doctors who only see patients in the office just don't see. They see patterns that you just don't see. I guess every epidemiologist knows Dr. Snow, you know, and removing the pump handle after he made a big map of all the cholera cases in the 1853 and 54 time frame in London, right? You got to go out and see. You got to physically go out and see. And that's what I've done for years, and wars and all kinds of other things. And patterns emerge and things emerge that you just can't see by reading everybody's work. You have to be the source, right? And so that said, Canada, overrun. I mean, you are clear. Let's go over to Ireland right now. I see Ireland's finally getting on the radar after we went to Ireland a couple of years ago, warning that Ireland was undergoing a soft genocide. In other words, it's not hard yet. There's murders occurring quite a lot now, but it's not like everybody's out with machetes. But Ireland is being invaded to the point where it's reaching a breaking point. Now, other countries are already broken, right? And but the bottom line is the architecture that's doing this is clear. United Nations, full stop. United Nations is the main architecture. If you go to your Toronto airport, you'll see IOM there, right? International Organization for Migration. Masako just took a flight from here in Panama. I took her to the airport, took them on the airport, the Panama City airport, and she flew with 26 Chinese that were being deported because we know they take Turkish Air. So she flew on Turkish Air. She talked with the Chinese here in the airport. I'm still in Panama. And then she talked with them on the flight over to Turkey. And so IOM was at the Panama airport, as they always are. And Masako flew with the Chinese over to Istanbul, to Turkey. And IOM was on that side as well, right? IOM is the architecture for this. If you go to Japan or you go to Netherlands and you go to Schiphol Airport, in Terminal 3 by the rotunda doors when you come in to the left. That's where the IOM ticket desk is, right? That's who's invading Canada. There are other substructures like Catholic Charity, more than 200 that we know of. I think it's probably more than 1,000. We just discovered another one yesterday. But the Chinese have their own architecture for getting in and getting out of places. The Chinese, as you know, and Indians of various sorts, of course, the Sikhs are going to end up having the Khalistani fight in Canada. But the Indians and the Chinese are going to be competing for Canada. That is my view based on looking at this quite a lot. But anyway, I'll stop there. We look at this everywhere. Panama is a main invasion route, and the canal is out my window. So I've been warning people about Panama for years. Trump staff completely. I warn them. I communicate with people very close to Trump every single day, including about 15 minutes ago. Right. So I mean, I've been warning about this ever since Biden was installed. I flew straight to Colombia, and I flew straight to Panama. And I've spent about a year here out of the last four or so years, realizing this would likely be a zone of action. Panama, but not just Panama. I think this entire region. Anyway, I'll go ahead and stop at that.
No worries, Michael. And you actually laid out quite the plan, and it definitely has an invasion all over the place, coming from the south for the U.S., the north as well. And you're seeing how there's different countries like India and China who were involved in this as well. And I'm not surprised because Western Canada is very, very, lots of Chinese there as well and set up. Clint Russell is a new face on the show. Thank you very much, Clint, for joining us. You had me on your show yesterday. It was very, very nice to meet you from Lockdown Liberty Podcast. And you've been recognizing that there's some issues as well. And of course, you're paying attention to the media and what's going on. But welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Jason. Yes, I've had Dr. Malone on my show about a year ago, and I've had on Chris Martenson and had lengthy conversations with Brett Weinstein after their interactions with Michael Yon in the Darien Gap. And they are actually the ones that convinced me. I was running for the vice presidency under the Libertarian Party, and my conversations with them were what convinced me that, you know, as a libertarian, my initial premise is open borders, you know, free trade, minimal barriers for people to migrate. And it was after those conversations that I started to go down the rabbit hole, and I realized that this was all inorganic, that in fact this was the United Nations that had been doing this through NGO funding networks and nonprofits, and it was Michael Yon's work that started me down this path. So it's an honor to be on with all of you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. And it was an honor to be on your show yesterday as well. So I really appreciate you coming to the show for the first time, because I think this conversation is really important. It doesn't really matter what political alignment you have. This is about security and ensuring that we have a future on all sides of the borders here. Councillor Lisa Robinson's back, a good friend of the show. She reached out and she said, hey, I have a couple inputs. She's in Ontario. Doug Ford is one of the ones that are kind of doing a lot of rhetoric, talking about like shutting off the electricity to the U.S., removing alcohol, U.S. alcohol from the stores and things like that. And plus, even around her own council, there's some rhetoric going around. Welcome back to the show, Lisa.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Jason. And please say hi to people in the chat, because I understand somebody in the chat said hi to me because I just got a text message on my phone.
No problem, but I thank you very much. We want to kind of let people know what Ontario's response is, and what do actual Ontarians feel about this. Does Doug Ford represent you?
No, Doug Ford definitely does not represent me and doesn't represent a lot of Ontarians here. You know, I think Canada is acting more like a spoiled child in a sandbox right now. And I think we're making fights that nobody can really take seriously at this time. You know, we're pulling the alcohol off of the shelves. Well, you know, we've already paid for the alcohol, you know, so we're really only hurting the taxpayers' bottom line at this point. You know, same with like, you know, the threatening of turning off the electricity to, what is it, New York, Minnesota, and what was the third one? There was another one that started with M. I can't think of it right
Maine.
now. Maine? No, not Maine. Anyone?
Not Montana. That's over here. Michigan.
No. I can't think
Anyways,
but,
we'll get to it.
Anyways, yeah, regardless of that, it's like, you know, they already have backup plans in place, especially New York. So, I mean, we just kind of look foolish. I mean, we are picking a fight, definitely not going to win. You know, we should have just closed our borders, done whatever we could to stop the drug trafficking, the fentanyl coming into Canada and going to the US, and stopping, the guns, the violence, the human trafficking. That's all we had to do. And none of this would be happening right now if we just secure our own borders. And I don't know why we are not securing our borders. We're having a crisis up here in Canada with housing, with illegal immigrants coming in. They make almost $8,000 a month while people are struggling to put healthy food on the table for their own families, put gas in their car, pay their bills, keep a roof over their head. So, I mean, it only makes sense that, we should be securing our border. So
100%.
That's how many Canadians feel right now. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Well, like I said in my intro, I'm embarrassed because our response should have been, yeah, okay, let's work together. Let's fix up the border. We have the same problems. Let's go ahead and address it. In fact, what a great partnership it would have made if we worked together on both sides of the border to address drugs, fentanyl, and other issues, especially the root cause of it, like from countries like China with the raw materials and actually infiltrating our countries. Plural. It's happening to both of us. We would have made a great partnership on that particular issue. Now, Dr. Malone, fourth generational warfare is something that you talk about a lot of. Do you see some of that in play here? Like, is this a psychological game on Westerners?
You probably mean fifth gen warfare.
Sorry, fifth gen. My bad.
Of course, there is a significant propaganda angle. And I'm being taught. I appreciate what I'm learning here. I wasn't aware of how active the United Nations was in promoting this. I knew that there were a lot of non-governmental organizations that were doing this. I knew that this was part of the Agenda 2030, that there should be open borders, that it's a fundamental human right to migrate to live wherever you want, according to the United Nations. I didn't know that the UN was actively involved in promoting this. So that's new news to me. In terms of the cyber or the psychological warfare aspect of this, I infer that there must be quite a bit of propaganda coming at you and nudge and other technologies being deployed to try to get the Canadian people to accept these policies. Is that the case?
100%. And it's like mass formation psychosis all over again, because already we're booing at sporting events. We're talking about buying Canada only. People are running over flags. Like, it's ridiculous. But yeah, they're falling for it, and they fell for it like overnight.
Wow. It's very powerful tech. Hard to resist.
I think what happened was they demonstrated how they could do that using our media and fear. Fear is definitely one of these. And it's working really, really good. Not in the way that I mean like good for relations, but if that's their goal, it's working. Now, Michael.
So what's the fear narrative relating to this migration? What's the fear aspect that they're promoting here to get people to accept it? Over.
Annexing Canada and doing us being like Ukraine and the U.S. is like Russia. That's how they're positioning it, and making us all fearful that there's going to be a U.S. annexation of Canada, or not necessarily like a kinetic war, but definitely an economic war. And that's what they're setting up the stage for. And what I'll do is I'll go to Michael to kind of clarify that a little bit more, and maybe some of the UN connection to that. Michael, do you want to go ahead and comment on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, you have to recognize that we're actually in a war, and this isn't migration. These are weapons, right? These are demographic weapons, just like the jab is a clear weapon. It's not a vaccine. Everybody, I think, knows that by now. Dr. Malone maybe can correct me, but I see no evidence that it was even experimental. People say experimental this, experimental. Okay, whatever. It was clearly a weapon, right? And this weaponized migration is, I mean, wars of demography are old. This is old timey. It goes back, or maybe that wasn't close enough. You can screenshot that and buy it. It was written by a socialist, and the people that do it. And so I'm seeing this around the world. I'm seeing different aspects of this war. For instance, again, I mentioned it to you before, but I publicly many times successfully predicted the interruption of Nord Stream so much that I went to Germany twice in advance. The last time was 14 days in advance. I was at the BASF plant. That's the big German plant right there in Ludwigshafen, Germany, next to the Rhine River. Why did I go there? I was there 14 days before Nord Stream got interrupted, saying, I think something's going to happen to Nord Stream. Why did I go there? I went there because it's very clear that our enemies and WEF and other much larger enemies than WEF, because WEF is just it's a group of people that are in other groups. But the bottom line is they're clear about.
I call it a trade union of the 1,000 largest companies in the world.
That's good. Like the one that right out my window here, BlackRock, that just bought the port, right? Or ports here, right? And again, I published in advance on that. American companies could buy these. Unfortunately, it's BlackRock, but in any case, but you're right, Doctor. And but we know that they want to deindustrialize Europe, right? So if you're going to do your Carver matrix, Carver is a planning tool that special operations use when you're selecting your targets, right? It's called Carver: criticality, accessibility, recuperability, vulnerability. Anyway, when I was in the Army, we learned these things, right? And so I did a Carver matrix for Europe, and I thought, well, if I'm going to deindustrialize Europe, I'm going to go for Germany, right? I've been all over Europe. I lived in Europe for 6 years, right? Ich spreche Deutsch eigentlich, right? And I speak German fluently, right? So I thought, well, if I'm going to take out Germany, who would I take out? I would take out BASF and Nord Stream, right? So I was at BASF 14 days. I was there twice, actually. The last time was 14 days before Nord Stream got blown up, right? Was I surprised? No, I bought an extra iPad that I just watched the flows, how many cubic meters per second were going. I watched for many months because I thought at one point these are going to go to zero, and they did. Likewise, we successfully predicted, Masako Ganaha and I, that Groningen gas field in Netherlands would be cut. It's the biggest gas field in Europe. And many times people were saying, when I kept publishing that, nobody's going to cut Groningen gas field because it's the biggest gas field in Europe. And I'm like, exactly. And they cut Groningen gas field. Not only did they cut it, but they filled it in with concrete. They've destroyed the gas field. It's unbelievable. Not the whole gas field, but a huge amount of it, the biggest part of it. That's a big deal. So these things all accrue to the destruction of Europe. For instance, the weaponized migration, the death jabs, the Nord Stream, Groningen, and on and on and on. So I'm watching the same in Japan, watching the same Thailand. You don't see it in the news much, but I've been to every province in Thailand, right? I've been all over that place. You can see me in the news with the prime ministers and all that stuff. I'm very familiar with Thailand because Thailand is strategically important, not Taiwan, Thailand. I go there too. But Thailand is the hyphen in Indo-Pacific, right? It's very important. And I see Thailand even being under attack now. I'll save that for some later time. But just remember what I said. In the future, you're going to see big problems in Thailand. But this is all part of a larger thing that's going on. The death jabs that Dr. Malone tracks and other pharma issues that are quite severe. And then there's the weaponized migration. There's the energy. There's the agricultural products that I've been warning about for years now. It's just a matter, when you have a war or a pandemic or a famine, you always get a lot of HOP, human osmotic pressure, which is the push and the pull of migration. Now we've got all these routes open, right? Now with Trump as president, the Darien Gap route is now down to a trickle, maybe 2% of what it was at this time last year. However, the infrastructure is completely there, and like I've got somebody down in Colombia right now with looking at this, right? And I just got back from the Darien Gap. The infrastructure is still there. United Nations is still operating full steam ahead. All the camps are open. All the camps are manned. There does continue to be a trickle coming through. What I'm saying is, and I've told the Trump team this many, many times, and I'll say it again right now. If you don't take out the United Nations, everything else is bullshit. If you don't take out the United Nations, all the rest is just Hollywood. You have to take out the United Nations and then address the Chinese architecture, because the Chinese get into Canada and the United States. And I was over in Armenia looking at them do it over there, and Georgia and all these places. They use their own architectures to do these things, and they're quite robust. And the Chinese are traveling on fake passports, right? They're official passports that are authentic, but they're not with their real name and that sort of thing. And lots of them. We know that more than 25,000 Chinese, as just one example, came through the Darien Gap in just 2023. Over 500,000 people came through just the Darien Gap. in 2023. And of that, over 25,000 were Chinese. A lot more were Afghans, Iranians, who's who in the zoo, over 150 countries.
And as Dr. Malone mentioned, it's psychological warfare. It works well. And as Michael's highlighting here, there is a global war that's going on. So, Clint, when you were watching the lockdowns kick in and things changed south of the border, you saw how people are going after each other, the vaxxed, unvaxxed. People were really scared. Those that would wear a mask, those that wouldn't wear a mask. And you saw that division happen. They've now ramped it up. Now it's country versus country, border across the border now. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think it's a natural evolution of the divide and conquer tactics, which are used perennially by governments just to keep us from rising up against governments. But this seems to take on a more nefarious, plotting nature, in that it seems to be global versus national interests. And I think that's, from my vantage point as a libertarian, even though I'm not like a diehard nationalist, I'm very much not a globalist. Like I want to go down as small to the local community as possible. When I realized that the nation state was actually being eroded to the benefit of globalist interests, that's when I really started to wake up to what was going on. Dr. Malone, when he was on Liberty Lockdown, a year and a half ago, really elucidated this with the fifth generation warfare and everything else. So I think that's what we're witnessing. And I think that, the Trump administration, the treatment of Trump, and then you just extrapolate that to any sort of populist right winger that embraces the nation state, in contrast to the globalist interests. They are treated in the exact same fashion, from Brazil to Romania to the U.S., obviously. There's so many examples, and I don't think it's coincidental. The playbook looks almost identical. I would love to get into more of the nitty-gritty with Mr. Yon, though, when he says they are doing this. I want to know who they is. Is he talking about China? Who's he talking about?
Actually,
take that one?
I can take it if you want, but I don't want to dominate the conversation, so maybe Lisa has something to say, or Dr. Malone.
Well, what we'll do is we'll circle back to that when we bring you back up, because that's a great question.
Let him go. I want to hear that. I have the same.
Let's go ahead, please. I want to hear it too.
Yeah, please.
There you go. We've yielded the floor to you there,
I
Michael.
always want to know who they are.
Just pull me back when I've gone too long, because there's a lot to say. When I took Brett Weinstein down to the Darien Gap, that man loves jungles, by the way. He did his PhD work down here. I took him and about 50 or 60 other people. I took a couple congressmen, Epoch Times, the whole works, like long who's who, right? Dr. Chris Martinson. And, but Brett, he loves the jungle, and he asked me who runs this thing. So I just asked him, he's an evolutionary biologist, who runs the jungle, who runs the jungle? I don't know, actually. I don't know who exactly they are. I know a lot of them. Clearly, Chinese Communist Party is one. Clearly, the extra large companies, let's say, like BlackRock, who just took, the port not very far from me right now. They took a couple for $23 billion, right? They are, more powerful than a lot of countries by far, obviously. And now BlackRock is one of the only companies that's allowed to do the asset management in China, interestingly, right? So in any case, and also Larry Fink of BlackRock, he's clearly all about letting this invasion continue. He's very clear about that. He was clear about it within the last about 48 hours, again, on video. So, so who's who in the zoo? We've got all these different oligarchical structures. You've got Chinese, but keep in mind, Chinese aren't monolithical. The Chinese Communist Party also has splits, and then there's a lot of Chinese that aren't with the Chinese Communist Party at all. I just got off the phone with one of those in the last hour or so. There's a lot of dissidents out there as well. Then you've got, of course, where do we end here? You've got just religions, of course. You've got globalists, for instance. I'm Christian. We are clearly globalist. You've got globalist Muslims, of course, and then there's Jewish structures which are globalist, but they're in a different way. They don't want to make everybody Jewish. They want to more take the cockpit, whereas Muslims and Christians kind of want to make everybody Muslim or Christian, right? So there's many different forms. If you're an evolutionary biologist like Dr. Brett Weinstein, then how would you classify these different types of globalists? You got the religious globalists, you've got the financial and the economic, you've got the economic and military globalists that just want to rule the world. Now, Panama. Why do I spend so much time in Panama? There's 7 vital choke points in the world, and one of them is Panama. Another is Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb, of course, Strait of Hormuz, Malacca, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, Panama in particular is very important to the United States. It's like, this important, right? It's pretty important. But we've also, so it's a path between the seas. This canal opened in 1914, which happened to be the same year that BASF in Germany started doing nitrogenous fertilizers there that got shut off with the Nord Stream getting cut. But anyway, 1914, this canal opened. But also there's a path between the continents here, between North and South America, which is slowly opening up. I'm the one that found those 2 bridges being built out in the jungle. And I first talked about those about over a year ago. And a lot of people said, no, that's impossible. Even the Panamanian government denied it. And I was like, look at the mud on my boots. I just drove up 6 hours to ask you who's building it, And so in any case, that was when I took Brett Weinstein and Chris Martinson and Epoch and all these other people down to the Laura Loomer, took them all down to those bridges. And you can see that path to Colombia in South America is being opened up. Now, China is very clear. They've got a book called Panama. It's called China's Belt and Road Initiative, Panama, right? And they've got their map right through the Darien, right? And so the Darien Gap, of course, that's what will connect, that does connect, Colombia and Panama. Now, keep in mind, the first town by Westerners in the North American mainlands, either North or South America, was open, not out in Dominican Republic. That was on an island, but on the mainland of North or South America, was opened in 1510 by Balboa. This is important. So Balboa opened this town called Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien, so of the Darien, right? So Santa Maria, basically of the Darien. It lasted for 14 years. The Indians knocked them out. But the reason that they built that town in the Darien is because of how important Darien is. People have been trying to make this path between the seas. They tried for 400 years before the United States finally did it. And it wiped some people off the map. The Spanish got hurt. And then the Scottish came in. And of course, the Scottish came in and they did their Darien scheme. Some people call it afterwards, but at the time they called it New Caledonia, which is, Caledonia is the old name for Scotland. But and some people called it New Edinburgh. But anyway, they started that in 1698. And by 1699, it wasn't doing so well. And 2,000 dead Scotsmen later, trying to make their passage between the seas in Darien, Scotland was broke. And so in 1707, 1706, 1707, finalized in 1707, Scotland was absorbed by the United Kingdom because Darien knocked them out. They went bankrupt and they were hurt. And that's how Scotland lost their sovereignty, even to this day, happened in Darien. And then come some other people, all got killed. And then come the French to build their canal, right? They went bankrupt. The guy that was the Frenchman that was working on the canal for the French was named, de Lesseps. He's the one that got credit for Suez Canal. They went bankrupt. He almost went to prison. And then Americans came in and said, we can do it. And people are like, no, you can't. And Americans, you know how Americans are crazy. And we did it. So in 1914, we opened the canal, right? And ever since that time, it's been slowly, it was great for a while. But bottom line is, they say Jimmy Carter gave it away. But that's like Jimmy Carter was just a Trudeau of his day, right? Just like Trudeau just gave away those islands off the West Coast, which will eventually, back to the indigenous people, right? When did he do that? About a month ago. So these sorts of things are nothing new. But when I've got a book here, everybody should read. Oh, is that it? Yeah, there it is. Actually, this is a very good book, Path Between the Seas. If you want to know more about how Panama was formed, Panama the country, and the Panama Canal, that's it. Path Between the Seas. It's a great book. I read it. It'll take you a little while, but it's very good. And if you read that one and you read The Creature from Jekyll Island together, it doesn't matter which order, you'll see The Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffin, he describes how the globalists took the Panama Canal from the United States and gave it to Panama. Panama is just a placeholder. Keep in mind, the United States formed Panama. We cleaved off a rib from Colombia so that we could make Panama, right? So we actually created Panama from scratch, and then we gave it sovereignty, and then we created the canal, which was ours, full stop. And then over time, the globalists wanted to take it back. It took a very long time. You know, I read a lot of old books, a lot. Yeah, I just spent like $6,000 on old books. I mean, this is to understand how all these things work. You can't understand it from just sitting where you're at. You have to really study history, right? And then you can start to see how these things are evolving. So the bottom line is, it was actually globalists that actually built the canal, actually. And if you want to be really clear about it. And then finally, they take it away from the United States and give it to Panama. And now we're taking it from Panama and giving it back to the United States, right? It's a little bit more twisted than it appears. The more you know, the more interesting it gets. On the psychological warfare, by the way, the main grease of psychological warfare is intoxicants, right? Whether that be alcohol or whatever, dope of any sort, it's intoxicants. You know, psychological warfare, if you really want to dumb people down. I found this book in Argentina a few months ago in an old bookstore from 1648, right? Reprinted in 1920 or something. And it talked about how the Spaniards were up in Guatemala using intoxicants to rob the indigenous people, right? That was a book from 1648. They were already doing it and describing it. This, you know, the intoxicants, these are actual weapons. They're weapons just like the weapons of mass migration. The intoxicants are a very serious weapon, just like the jab. So we're getting hit from all these different angles, and you can't understand what's happening with the migration, which is really invasion, unless you understand the rest of this historical context and the context of the energy and the food and these sorts of things.
I just want to add real quick that, Panama Canal was completed in 1914. The Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913. If you're going to talk about the globalist aspects of the Panama Canal, well, the ultimate weapon of control for the financial system was the creation of the United States Federal Reserve. So I think that timing is not coincidental, and the fact that G. Edward Griffin talked about both of those issues is also, it makes perfect sense that he would identify the value in both of those. I also wanted to talk about the I don't want to occupy any time, so we'll just keep ping-ponging.
No, for sure. And what I want to start to kind of get us into is, now that we see this globalist and there's multiple arms to this globalist, there's like a big, let's say, octopus. There's many different arms to this, whether it's religious, economic, other, whether they're going through countries, whether they're going through trade, but there's a lot, or migration, as Michael's pointed out, and intoxication, and trying to dumb down a country. There's a lot of tentacles to this thing. Now, Lisa, I think you're muted on your end, but I'm about to bring you up. What is it like for you as a Canadian to see this kind of relationship deteriorate the way it is, and how disrespectful Canadians are being about this? This is not like us. Now, I remember during the lockdown phase of things, there were Canadians calling for other Canadians to be picked up in trucks and force vaccinated and all this kind of stuff. That was very un-Canadian. And now here we are booing the anthem of the U.S., our closest neighbor, and getting into a fight where we literally cannot win. So what are we doing as Canadians, and what's your impression of that?
Yeah, I was completely distraught. I was completely ashamed of Canada, seeing them booing our neighbor's national anthem during a hockey game. I didn't think that Canadians would ever stoop so low. And then also to have our prime minister say, basically, it's okay to do that. And like, hey, we're not booing the people. We're just booing, like, Trump. But yet, they're doing it at a hockey game. I mean, that was really, really embarrassing. And you know what? I was actually very happy when US won in that game, because it felt like karma. Like, how dare us sit there and boo our neighbors? That was unpatriotic as we could possibly get. It was the low of the low at that point. And yeah, and to your point, the way that they were treating the unvaccinated here in Canada, on the front page of the Star, they were saying that if you were unvaccinated and if you wanted to go to a hospital, let them die. Don't let them go to the hospital. They just let them die. I mean, that's the behavior. And that's what's been happening to Canada over the last 5 years. It's just been deteriorating. It's like, we're going down the slippery slope and the snowball's halfway down the hill and we just can't stop it. It's spiraling out of control right now. And Canadians just aren't as nice as, everyone say that we are, because we're not. We're not.
And another thing
at all.
For sure. And another thing,
medical assistance in dying programs in Canada, is that shifted at all?
It got worse. So what happened is we were at the NCI in Edmonton just a couple days ago, Dr. Malone, having this conversation. It's gotten worse, 30% year over year. They're opening it up to new types of things. And on the table is still medical assistance in dying for mature minors, which is literally children. So we're working on passing that particular bill still. Yeah, you want to comment on that, Dr. Malone?
No, I'm just wondering what the status is. So what you're teaching me is that there has not been an awareness that this is unethical, but rather the government is continuing to advance and expand the program. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, correct. Advancing, expanding the program, making it easier. They even removed the requirements to wait, so you actually can get a day of. So if you decide to make that decision, you can make it day of now. And yes, we've had abuses of the system too. We even have things that they're not allowed to do, that they're breaking the rules of. About 23% is what we found in the NCI. About 23% of the MAID's procedures are actually illegal according to even the MAID's requirements. So people are getting through and having a final solution, and Canadians are not stopping it at this stage.
To the Canadians on the panel, is this basically just like the final culmination of a complete destruction of the Canadian spirit, that they would then offer up assisted suicide? Is this like, does it feel as if this is a caring proposal, or is this just like part of depopulation agenda? I'm just like, what does it feel like to you guys?
Well, for me, it feels like it's psychological warfare for us to be depressed and to go ahead and encourage a society where you go ahead and make those kind of decisions, including for your children or by the children. And that's the most scary part. In parts of Canada, Clint, a child can make this decision and the parent has no say. And there are some court precedents now where the child, if they're declared by the state as a mature minor, the parent has lost all rights. So this is the road that Canada is going down. It's very scary. It's very scary.
This in America, we were always, we thought it couldn't get any worse than allowing minors to transition their genders. You guys are allowing minors to take their own lives. You're taking it to the next level. This is astonishing. I mean, is there any sense of, forgive my language, but what the fuck are we doing here? I mean, do the Canadians like how are they responding to this?
Let me explain to you how we got there quickly, because we had a bill called Bill C4, which was to take away parental rights when it came to young people who wanted to transition or go down that road. We made it illegal for you to counsel in any way, as a parent or otherwise, any person who is not heading back to their birth sex. You can counsel away from your birth sex, but you can't counsel towards your birth sex. That is a jailable offense now in Canada. And what that did was it stripped parents of the rights. And then that's where the dominoes started to happen. Then it was medical decision, vaccine. Children would be able to choose that for themselves. So it went from transitioning to vaccines to death. And that's the slippery slope that we went down.
That's
Lisa, do you want to comment? Yeah, you want to comment on this one, Lisa?
Yeah, no, you said it just perfectly there. And it's them offering a solution. It's their solution. It's Canada's solution, instead of actually helping the people. So if we have a lot of poverty that's happening here, we have a lot of people on our streets homeless. So instead of getting to the root of the problem and helping them transition into other homes and get them off the streets, or if they have a really severe addiction, instead of helping them with their addiction, it's we're opening up all these sites. Here, go ahead, have more, go have as many injections as you want, and don't worry, we'll watch over you. But you know what? If they go looking for help, then the first thing is, well, you know what? You live on the streets. You don't have any family. Nobody really cares for you. You're feeling down and out. Hey, we've got a solution made. And that's the solution, right? Instead of actually before we used to care about the people. We used to get them the help that they needed, take them to the hospitals, get them the help that they needed. And now it's here's the solution. Just go kill yourself.
Well,
it's easy, and then we don't have
but Lisa and Clint, they're not killing themselves. The state is killing them. Mm-hmm. Let's be quite clear. This Correct. Is not, This is medical assistance in dying is state murder, really.
Yeah.
And they're just creating conditions to incentivize people to accept state murder but that's what it is. Your nation state is murdering its own citizens. I mean,
Correct.
it is stark. It's stunning.
Let me give you two examples, good recent examples. One was a BC woman who checked herself into the hospital because she felt suicidal. And their response to her was, we can get you psychiatric care in 7 months, or we can get you maids right now. Thankfully, she didn't take maids, and she shared that story with everybody. And then we also have Kayla Pollock, who's an Ontario mother who, after her booster, became paralyzed. And as part of
Right.
that process, they keep
Right.
offering her maids as a solution to her she's a young mother, and maids is what they keep offering to her instead of dealing with her issue, offering a ramp for her home, helping her have a better life care. They keep offering her maids. That's exactly where we're at here in Canada now.
Dr. Malone asked earlier about the psychological warfare tools or the propaganda tools that the Canadians may be languishing under that is bringing them down this path. And I'm curious, just from an American perspective, I have no idea if the Canadians will agree with me on this, but it seems as if they feed off of your kindness and your aversion to shame. Like Americans tend to have more of the stand up, don't tell me to do anything type of mentality. And we don't really care about social shame, and not all of us, many of us do, but I think what makes the American spirit kind of unique is that we will go against the trend, we'll go against the crowd, and we'll suffer the consequences. It seems as if they are feeding off of your go along to get along kindness, apologetic nature to take you down a very dark path. Is that a good read of what's happening?
It's very accurate. In fact, they call it like dignity in dying. And if you're against it, you want pain and suffering. And this is what they come to you is like, oh, you want people to suffer, but they don't even listen to the argument that there's palliative care. We've been doing this forever. We understand how to address pain at the end of life and how to make people comfortable without killing them. But no, this is exactly, you're right. This is exactly what they're doing. They're using our compassion against us in the same way they did during COVID. Don't you care about grandma? You're going to kill grandma if you don't do this. Same thing. But now this is end of life. And even Anthony Fauci, NIH under Anthony Fauci, they did a review of Canada's progress towards maids for mature minors. And even Anthony Fauci's team said, you guys have gone too far. You need to have life-affirming care, not life-ending care when it comes to these situations. And Canada quite literally just ignored it and didn't even respond to that report out of NIH.
Imagine
If
going
Anthony Fauci tells you you're going too far, you're really
I know, that's quite the line, right? If he's
That's
if
exactly
he's
what I
saying
was going to
don't
say.
go.
If Fauci thinks you guys have lost your mind, you have truly lost your minds.
yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah.
over the top.
Dr. Malone, you want to comment on that?
There's nothing to say. Tony Fauci. My only comment about Tony Fauci is an anecdote I'm hearing from my friends in Italy that Tony is hanging out in Italy, hiding in northern Italy, and there's a movement afoot to try to get him arrested and potentially deported because there are multiple attorneys general in the United States at the state level that are all cooperating to try to bring charges against him since he has immunity at the federal level.
Wow, that's huge
that-
news.
That would unify the world pretty quick. I would get on a boat and come and help you. A lot
Hey,
of people want to do that.
So there was just a poll out, an Axios poll. Something like 60% of Americans still support Tony Fauci.
That's insane.
It's very biased towards Democrats, but there's a large number of Republicans also that support Tony Fauci and still think he's a hero.
Well, what I heard you say is 40% of Americans have higher intelligence. So that's great news. Let's get that continued to grow. If we get to 45, 50, 51, we'll be there, right? Michael, what are your thoughts about this too? Because maids is a subject that you and I haven't spoken about before, but they're not wrong because part of this depopulation, if that's one of the tentacles of globalism, is to convince your population to kill themselves. What a better tool than that?
Oh yeah, when Misako Ganaha and I went up to Japan, that was specifically one of the things we were looking into was MAID actually. But over in Vancouver, we went to one of those centers where they actually hand out drugs. I published video. I mean, a guy stooped over, he can't light his drug pipe, and we walked in here where they're giving literally the government's giving drugs to people. They kicked us out. But when I was stationed in the Army, and I was in the Army about 500 years ago, it seems like now, but in Germany. And I was in special forces, and occasionally we talked about how did they get the Germans to do this? Like, how did they, really get all these people that we're seeing around us, like their grandparents, to load people up on trains and do mass murder? We just thought, I don't know, something wrong with Germans, right? But it stuck with me pretty hard, because I'm like, it doesn't reconcile with my current knowledge set, right? And when that book Nazi Doctors came out, I bought that book and I read it. That was a long time ago, and I was again trying to figure out, how did a population do this, because it's not been the only one. Now, since that time, I've learned a lot more and traveled around the world a lot. Spent most of my life in other countries, right, and a lot of time in war, actually. And what I found is ordinary men, the book Ordinary Men. Ordinary men will do these things. Will do the maid. They'll do the medical assistance in dying. They'll actually hand out drugs to their own people. Our own Border Patrol. I've seen our own Border Patrol load up thousands of people right in front of my eyes when I'm making video of them this close, right? Thousands. I went across the entire southern border. I mean, probably literally, without exaggerating, probably tens of thousands, because it took months. And I would ask them, why are you doing this? You're invading our own country. And people would literally say things like, I'm doing my job. What are you doing here? And, or the ones that would talk with you, I don't want to get fired. I mean, good job. I'm like, yeah, but you're invading our country. You're not going to get the retirement that you're planning on if our country's dead. In fact, you'll probably be dead too, because we're bringing in tens of millions of these people from incompatible countries. Again, I've spent most of my life downrange in 99 countries, right? I spend most of my life in places like, Afghanistan, India, all over the place, right? And I've learned a few things. One is that some fish don't mix well in the same aquarium. And the weapons of mass migration and these, psychological warfare, drugs, all these different weapons are all being brought to bear at once. But instead of us talking about the symptoms, like, why are they doing this when they could just make them better? Why are they giving them drugs? Actually, we should be talking about the people that are actually doing it. So identify them in specific countries. Now, the larger level is kind of hard to identify. It gets to be kind of nebulous up there, but we can identify local faces who are doing it, right? The people who are running the places where they're doing MAID, the prime ministers and that sort of thing in various countries, like Mark Rutte when he was in Netherlands, taking the farms away. Those are specific puppets, right? Puppeticians, as some people call them, right? And those names are on the dollars, let's say. And that is the problem. We're talking about symptoms all the time when we're talking about, well, they should get them off the drugs. And actually, we should be talking about who's doing this. Who's the people that are like Secretary Mayorkas came down to the Darien, right? He was the Secretary of Homeland Security. He landed there on April 19th, I think, 2022. I waited for him for 4 days. He landed right in front of me, 4 Blackhawks with General Laura Richardson was commander of Southcom at the time, and the ambassador Aponte, U.S. ambassador to Panama. They all landed down there, and they brought more money and increased the size of the invasion camps of the Darien Gap, right? So we know who did it. Mayorkas, you were the messenger. Now, he's not the big boss, but we know that he's directly connected to somebody who's directly connected. In any case, Mayorkas and Fauci and all those clowns should be in prison. They should be flex cuffed, sitting on the curb, and hauled away to prison.
I think what's a really interesting insight into Mayorkas as head of DHS, he was also the one that gave a clean bill of health to the head of the Secret Service after the attempt on Trump's life. I found that to be a very fascinating connection, given that he was largely, if not the primary figure that allowed for the enormous invasion into the United States. I wanted to tie back into what he was talking about earlier with how people went along with the Holocaust and other atrocities throughout human history. And I think many of us all thought this is an anomaly, this is an impossibility, this would never happen in a society like ours. And then the lockdowns happen and we all go, oh, I get it now. Like, I understand it. But this is the point I wanted to make, is that Murray Rothbard actually had a tremendous insight into this. He's a famous Austrian economist and kind of a founding father of libertarianism. And he did, in his kind of magnum opus, Anatomy of the State, he describes how the nation state rises and falls. And he says that the final iteration, he's doing this based off of analysis of historical examples of the state. And he says that the final iteration of the state is scientism. So once statism loses its appeal to the population, it loses its ability to control the masses. They then relent, or they basically are left with using scientism and migrating their an appeal to authority through medical science. And this is why you see so many examples of states in their dying days. They rely on appeals to authority and to scientific figures that ultimately end up in, genocide or starvation. The USSR had great examples of this too, where you would have them trying to change their food production and ending up killing tens of millions of people. It happened in Mao's China too. So it's like, this is what humanity does. And I think that's the one thing that I just wanted to bring up to Mr. Yon, as to, we're trying to figure out who's responsible for these things. But because it's happened in historical cycles, it makes me wonder if this isn't just a natural phenomenon, as like the power structure starts to erode and the people that are trying to maintain their hold on power, this is just what happens in human nature. Is there any possibility of that? Or does this have to be a coordinated attack? I mean, the lockdown certainly looked coordinated, but I don't know.
So you're talking about the fourth turning is kind of the argument you're making, right?
Exactly.
Over.
Okay. And what I actually want, and thank you, Dr. Malone, so much for bringing this topic up and having an interest in this. So let me tell you how this happens in Canada. There isn't like a bill that got passed and said, let's go ahead and do maids. They modified the criminal code, murder portion of the criminal code, to create an exception. So it's not even healthcare at this stage. But here's the scary part. They're headed towards making this healthcare, because there's hospitals that will not perform this procedure because it's by choice right now. The hospital can choose not to do it. So what they ended up doing for one particular situation was there was a Christian-based or a religious-based hospital, and they said, no way we're doing this. So what did they do? They expropriated some land from that hospital and built a building to do just that, perform maids procedures there. So that's how they did that. And then in Quebec, this is very scary, Quebec is now moving it into healthcare. So by doing that, that's going to be a requirement for hospitals to go ahead and offer this procedure, because it will be considered healthcare. And when Quebec does stuff like that, Canada soon follows. So you got to pay attention. So right now, it's just an exception to the criminal code in all of Canada, but they're heading towards making it healthcare, which will make it a mandatory procedure for all hospitals in Canada. And that's how they're rolling this out right now.
Yeah.
Can I mention one other thing as we're talking along this thread, because it is intertwined? Basically, what happened to the Germans? And what I heard was the development, or the starting of the development of the logic that people were just doing their job. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of the bureaucrat's creed. I'm just doing my job. Yep. I'm just a cog. I'm not responsible. So I just wanted to put a pin in the work of Hannah Arendt, and in particular, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she makes the observation that this is the banality of evil, that this concept of evil that we have through Christian theology and other religions, we equate it with the devil and things like this. But in fact, it often manifests in this very trivial way of just saying, hey, I'm just doing my job and I can't be blamed. I'm just a cog in the wheel. And it's necessary, of course, to continue doing my job because I have to pay my mortgage, feed my kids, blah, 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 fill in the blank. And this is absolutely how they get you. I think this is what's behind a lot of the indebtedness too. I think that, aligned with you, and I'm glad to hear you quoting Murray Rothbard, one of my favorites. I'll be speaking at Mises in about a month again. So what's deployed is this form of indentured servitude through indebtedness that has. And through the kind of industrialization process that has torn the families apart. If you think about it, the real rot starts with the dissolution of the family and the dissolution of community. Yeah. And once they've got that broken, then they can manipulate the populations in a variety of different ways. and you become decoupled. You're unhinged from any other social structure that might say to you, it might give you a clue. No, this isn't right. And I think what's happened with MAID is just so overt. I mean, the rest of the world, you want to not to shame Canada, but certainly for much of the world that becomes aware of your MAID policies, it's shocking. It's shocking that a civilized nation in the British tradition, steeped in Judeo-Christian ethics, and as was alluded to a few minutes ago, just general niceness. I mean, that's what I've always thought about the Canadian people historically is when I go up there to show horses or whatever, they're just really nice people. And that's all gone now in some strange way, as if, but the same is also true with Australia and New Zealand. There's something going on with these former British nation states that is making them curiously vulnerable to this type of manipulation. And maybe some of the things we've talked about here touch on that, but Canada does seem to be a particularly egregious example of, a nice, Judeo-Christian society that's been torn apart and is now endorsing policies that are just clearly obscene, are horrific.
Just to connect the dot back to Rothbard for a second, he was talking about how the foundational destruction that brings a society down is the destruction of the family unit. I would argue that the initial starting point is actually the destruction of the dollar or the exchange of currency. This is also another Rothbardian insight, but once you have an inflationary wave,
yes,
that's
inflation.
That's when
Yes.
both parents have to start to work. That's when they can't take care of their kids. The family unit starts to devolve. Crime starts to increase. Then the state power starts to increase. Everything that we've dealt with over the past 100 years is a consequence of 1913 and G. Edward
And
Griffin's
Clint, so
work.
you're on a rip. Inform us about what is inflation useful for the nation state? What does the nation state use inflation for? And that's covered in the monograph, What Happened to My Money, as I recall, from Rothbard.
Yeah, well, I mean, endless war is the primary outcome of the
And-
manipulation of currency. Oh, go you give me the and. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah. So it's two things. Inflation is used by the state to support two things: social programs and war.
Yep.
That's it.
And then at that point, your population is so reliant on the state that they will continue to vote for more and more state largesse, in which case they will absorb more and more of your rights, more and more of your capital via taxation, and then ultimately you're a slave. And I think the reason I think that some of this is more organic than it is orchestrated, and excuse the blurring of my camera, is because the entire world is awash in debt as a consequence of the century of central banking after 1913. I mean, we're talking about quadrillions of debt. So all of these nation states are essentially underwater, if not for the printing press, if not for their capacity to borrow. So I think that what we're experiencing, and the reason that fifth generation warfare is being waged against the populations of the world, and I know this sounds totally lunatic fringe to even talk like this, but I genuinely think I'm right, is that they have to transition to a new currency unit. This is the whole reason that the electronic
Absolutely.
currency has been floated. In fact, Canada and Carney is almost certainly going to usher that in upon the Canadians.
Ursula von der Leyen was just endorsing it at European Union.
Yep, the digital euro. Exactly right.
In fact, we just released a video from 2009 when Mark Carney was asked by Maxime Bernier about the inflation rate at that time, because Carney was the governor of the Bank of Canada at that time. And he just flat out said, look, there's a globalist target at 2%. In fact, Canada ended up doing 2.5% from that moment all the way to now. which totally devalued us. And the third thing that actually happens, at least in Canada here, Dr. Malone, is the wealth that has been accumulated, it gets deteriorated. Your wealth is worth a lot less. Your generational wealth and what you're going to pass on is worth less and less as inflation kicks in. And you asked a great question. I'm not sure who it was. Maybe it was Dr. Malone. But how is this happening in the Commonwealth? Well, there's a trusted news initiative, which actually is controlling a lot of narratives around Canada. And when you control the media, you're going to control the population because they still trust it even at this stage. They put more trusted news initiative in it. So Michael, Michael, how big of an impact would something like that organization have on people? And then historically, let's use your $6,000 worth of books and your reading to our advantage here. Historically, how do populations respond to this?
Interesting, by the way, speaking of money and all these, I got these gold back things. I use them as bookmarks. I got that from Mike Adams. So I carry it, but whenever I buy new books, that'll be my new bookmark. The gold back currency. Well, I think some, to the point earlier about, this seems natural actually, and I studied history voraciously. I spent all day yesterday actually in the library beside the canal, by the Panama Canal. And so I'm either going there in the wars or whatever, or in the libraries. And it does seem, based on just seeing stuff around the world and reading a lot. And I do think genocide, I know this will sound controversial, but it is just a thing that humans do. Like monkeys go kill the other tribe, or one ant nest goes and robs the other. I mean, people just do that. And I mean, I see it everywhere. There's soft genocides I've seen, and then the more hard genocide. Hard is just like, you take the machetes and Houthis and Tutsis go at it, right? And hard genocides happen all the time. When I was in Tibet, of course, that was a sort of a mixture between hard and soft. Hard, they killed a bunch of Tibetans, the Chinese did, and soft, ran them out, right? Now, when I was in Hong Kong, I got kicked out of Hong Kong in 2020. Chinese don't like me. But I was in Hong Kong a lot. I was in there, especially during 2019 when they were having this final spasms there. But the Hong Kongers would tell me all the time, one of the main ways that they've, diluted our power, the Hong Kongers' power, is by migration. They would bring in like 100 to 150 mainlanders per day, year after year, and they would take key positions like as teachers and as politicians, elected politicians, policemen, of course, and all these different professors in the universities. There was a Confucius Institute there in Hong Kong University. I mean, I went into it. I went inside there's a Confucius Institute right around the corner from me, like 5 minutes walk away right now. I mean, these Confucius Institutes are another way that they infiltrate the schools, and I've gone into that in detail in the past. But what they did was they did a soft dilution of the Cantonese speaking Hong Kongers with Mandarin speaking mainlanders. And in school, they taught the children that you have to speak Mandarin, not Cantonese, because Cantonese is basically for Chinese rednecks, right? And so they take it linguistically, they take them over. And I see this all over the world. I saw it in Nepal. I was in Nepal during that war for about a year. I was out with the Maoists a lot, and they were doing the same things. I see it everywhere. I see it in southern Thailand. I spent 2 years in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. I've seen the same. One thing about war, by the way, I think it's probably a little bit like veterinary science. If you know how a mouse works more or less, and how an elephant works more or less, and how a blue whale works more or less, you know basically how all of them work more or less. Mm-hmm. Wars are all the same, and they're all very, very different, right? And as long as you're talking about the same classes of war, whether it's kinetic or whatever. And one thing I will say about wars, and I'll close out, is when wars always do three things, predictably do three things. One is wars grow, they grow. And they grow unpredictably because they're complex systems. And then they almost always last longer than most people expect. Anyway, I could go on for hours about this, but how do all these genocides?
Well, let's come back to that part in a second. Let's go, Dr. Malone. I think he wants to mention something.
Mm-hmm. So we're hearkening back to Murray Rothbard, and so this is causing me to think, as we're talking about genocide, Rothbard asserts there's only two ways to develop wealth, to gain wealth. One is through your labor, and the other is through theft. Is genocide a form of theft? I think it is.
I think it
I
is.
think that what we're doing, what is being done through the vehicle of genocide, is stealing assets or a caste which is facilitating that. And if you want to see a graphic example of that, read the Kissinger report, which is United States policy, foreign policy right now. The Kissinger report specifically talks about the need to depopulate or maintain low populations in regions of the world that have significant natural assets, particularly mineral assets, so that the United States and its corporations can exploit those resources. We don't want those nation states with those mineral resources to have large populations, because that then becomes a barrier for exploitation. And that is theft. That's I mean, I just want to throw that out, that what we're observing in these trends towards genocide is really a form of wealth accumulation through depopulation, which is virtually theft. They are stealing the wealth of nations through driving depopulation.
I agree with that assessment. Well, what's so frustrating is that it's also the destruction of the productive capacity of the humanity that they're destroying. And therefore, they are, in fact, destroying immense wealth. I mean, the lockdowns are a great example of this. I mean, by shutting down the global economy, or at least a huge swaths of it, you evaporated trillions of dollars in actual productive wealth, not print wealth, which is what the nation states of the world responded to. Was like, yeah, sure, we're wiping out trillions in productive wealth, but we're just going to print it, and so everything's going to be fine. It's like, oh, well, here comes the inflationary wave, of course, inevitably. But it's so short-sighted. And I think that's what frustrates me more than anything, is like, I sometimes will try and put myself into the shoes of our overlords, of the central bankers of the world. And I'm like, you guys have it so good. You're profiting so much from the system as it stands today. And yet you're still taking the short-sighted approach that we are going to, basically wipe out humanity. Therefore, we can accumulate more of these natural resources. But simultaneously, you're sacrificing trillions in wealth that would have been produced by those people, which you could have then taxed us on.
They are profoundly arrogant, these people.
Yes, they are.
They're just, and they're arrogant and they're narcissistic.
Yeah, that's a bad mix.
And I think you've nailed it, Dr. Malone, because if you see with Ukraine, what is it that the U.S. is going to pull out of there? Rare earth. They're going to make a deal there. What are they looking at Greenland for? Rare earth. Minerals.
You know what? Can I? So I'm not in with that rare earth argument. I think that what's really going on in Ukraine is it is literally the world's breadbasket. It is some of the most productive agricultural land in the world, and they have massive petroleum, particularly natural gas deposits. And in particular, what I've learned is all along the coast of the Black Sea, it's just full of natural gas. So the whole, we're going to go there for rare earths so we can build batteries for our Teslas or whatever the thing is, I think that's a little bit of a ruse. I think that the Ukraine situation has a lot to do with productive agricultural land and petroleum. Since we're in this Austrian school frame of reference and keep coming back to it, energy is kind of the only form of capital these days. It is the ultimate form of capital.
Yeah, and where I was going with that is that's a term I didn't hear until very recently, but it's definitely a resource issue. They're going after resources, and the population is in the way. So this is not I don't think it's to control the population. I think it's to control the resources.
And who has the contract? I don't know if Canadians are attuned to this. Who did the United States government grant the contract to rebuild Ukraine? Rimshot.
BlackRock. Yeah. Yeah. And then that's where the Panama Canal and the Northwest Passage comes in, because there'll be moving of resources. So I think it's definitely going to be a resource issue. I'm going to come to Lisa, and then I'm going to come to Michael quickly, and because we do have to start wrapping up and get everybody back to their evening. Now, media, Lisa, one of the things that you know well, and I'm sure Dr. Malone knows as well, is media has been weaponized against people that speak up and make conversation. But another thing that's been weaponized here is our stability and our security in the country. When you're worried about where your food comes from, guess what you don't do? You don't go fight your government. And when you don't have, money coming in and you're scared that you're going to lose everything.
Oh, hold on about that. If you
and
want a
guess what?
revolution, the best way to get a revolution is a food problem. The Hungry 40s in the 1840s in Europe, there was a lot of revolutions. 3 dozen, I think, something like along those lines, and it was related to food. Food.
Correct.
If you want to see a government destroyed, cut off their food supply. That government will be destroyed.
Right. And I think what we're seeing here in the modern times is they've kind of find the line just enough to keep you hungry and distracted, but not enough to go ahead and stand up against it. And that's where I think we're headed in Canada. I think we might actually be getting to that point. And then, Michael, that's why I'm going to come back to you in a second, because I think you can warn us about what's about to happen if we don't smarten up before we get there. But Lisa, as somebody who's been targeted by the media, you know what it's like. They're just attacking you. Now they're attacking all of Canadians and Americans now as well. Do you think, when you talk to your constituents, are they distracted, or do they just not care about what's going on?
Oh, they do care, but they are distracted, and they're very, very fearful. They're very, very afraid, because anybody here who does speak out, they start targeting them at their place of employment, trying to get them to lose their jobs. In fact, I just heard recently that a member in the government's family member decided to email another person's place of employment and try and get them fired for some statements that they made on social media. So that's the point that we're at right now. And, I have a lot of my supporters, a lot of people that are sticking up for me. And even if they're not my supporter, but they still want to stick up for me, because yes, I haven't been paid for 9 months now as an elected official for standing up. But they're afraid, because they will lose their jobs if they speak up, because the media will target them. People over social media will target them. And, the Canadians here aren't as nice as you think, a lot of them, because they do actually phone up employers and try and get people fired. So they can't provide for their families. So they can't put the food on the tables. It's really, really crazy what's happening over here right now in Canada. And we need to put a stop to it very quickly, because it is starting to trickle, all across to the other provinces right now. And we're in a sad state over here right now in Ontario.
This sounds like CCP struggle sessions.
Completely true. And Michael, what they say is it will take 2 weeks of empty shelves, and then that's it. It's over. The system's broken. Is that what you're heading to?
Maybe more like 3 days of that. A couple days. Yeah.
I'd have to agree with you on that. I think it would be just a few days, and chaos will be completely out there, and it will destroy people. I mean, look what happened during the lockdowns, right? What happened with the toilet paper frenzy, or the lack of the food on the shelves. People were starting fist fights in the aisles at grocery stores, grabbing the last thing off of the shelf. I mean, it was completely insane. Imagine now if that comes and that happens with our food sources. It's not going to be very pretty.
And one way to clear out the shelves is a trade war. That's exactly how you do some of that. You have a trade war. We don't grow oranges in Canada. There's a lot of products that we need that we can't make here in Canada. So one way to go ahead and empty those shelves is to do a trade war. Michael, do you want to kind of finish up that one thought about how people will respond?
Well, again, there's many weapons being brought to bear here, and Dr. Malone's right. This is about routes and resources. Is what's it about? That's what it's about. So, I mean, that's why Panama Canal's out my window, right? Because this is one of the 7 strategic naval routes, right? I think eventually you're going to see us go for the Suez Canal too. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I say a lot of crazy things like Nord Stream's going to get interrupted and Groningen will get knocked out, right? And they turn out to be right. So I think we're going to end up going for Suez, and eventually, and Bab al-Mandeb. I don't know how we're going to do it because we haven't beat back the Houthis yet. And then eventually, Strait of Hormuz. Of course, that would mean war with Iran. And I don't know how that would turn out either. But I think that's what we see accruing along the magnetic lines here. And one thing that I've warned about thousands of times in about the last 5 years is food. I think we're going to end up with food problems, like serious problems. That's one of the reasons, that's one of the ways that I predicted that Nord Stream and Groningen would be cut, was because I know that to make nitrogenous fertilizers, you need natural gas so that you can take that hydrogen and you do the Haber-Bosch process, combine it with the nitrogen that we're breathing and make ammonia, right? And so methodically, our food supplies have been attacked. Food prices continue to go up. I mean, at some point, whether it be power outage or something along those lines, we could have severe food shortages, and then it's over. I mean, at that point, nobody's going to listen to any law enforcement. Law enforcement aren't going to be doing their jobs anyway, and everybody's going to be, it's going to be Planet of the Apes. And that's what generally happening. We should come on one time and just talk for about an hour about famine. It's something I've studied quite a lot, because remember, pandemic, famine, and war, it's like the triangle of death. If you get a big war or a big pandemic or a big famine, you'll always get the other two, right? If you get a big one, big pandemic, always you'll end up with famine and war, right? And likewise, I mean, this COVID thing is obviously bullshit, right? I mean, but it was very effective at pushing people into the real weapon, the jab, right? That was a forcing maneuver to force people into the ambush, basically, right? And so anyway, long story short, we should talk about famine sometime.
Absolutely. We'll have you back for that for sure. And Clint, one of my concerns here is things like 15-minute cities, and people don't understand that what those are going to be are zones that you're locked down into. So zone A may have something, but zone B doesn't. And even here in Canada, they're putting it around hospitals, and you can't go from hospital to hospital because it's not in your zone or your territory. So they're heading in that direction as well. How long do you think it would take in the US? Because we're here in 3 days, it would be crazy in Canada. How long do you think it would take in the U.S. if the food shortage and famine was starting to kick in?
Oh, it'd be very fast. I mean, particularly for Americans, we're just awash in abundance, and we have been for so long. Any sense of shortages, I mean, you already saw a microcosm of that just with the toilet paper panic of 2020. I mean, we lost our effing minds because we thought that we were going to be out of toilet paper, which, by the way, is something you can absolutely live without, but you definitely can't live without food. So, yeah, if you don't have food, it would be rapid. I am actually more optimistic than the panel, which is rare. I don't think that our overlords want to starve us out, because I think that's the only way that they actually get attacked themselves. So I think that they will keep the food going as long as possible, but they're going to try and take as much in terms of economic wealth in the meantime. I don't think that they're interested unless they have a loyal army that will wage war against the American people or the people of the world. I think that's unlikely. But here's the problem: they are philosophically, so many of them are committed to a Marxist worldview, and they have really lost track of the value of a free market and what is necessary in terms of capital allotment in the production of food. That just because they're so detached from reality, they could unintentionally create pandemics. But Mr. Yon may be right. They may intentionally try and starve us too. I don't know.
Well, one of the terms that they have for us is useless eaters. So they definitely see us as somebody that consumes the food. Now, Dr. Malone,
I just think they would rather kill us in a different way than starving us out, because then we get violent. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know. I wish I had a better idea. But Dr. Malone, psychologically, how do we break out of this psychosis? Is there a way? Like, these conversations help, but if our government just put another gun ban in place, there's another 176 guns or something like that they just put on a do not own list, and they're going after the guns. They I think are worried that we're going to do exactly what we're talking about here. We're going to fight back.
Well, and that was successful in Australia, right? So what is it that we could do to break out of it? What Matthias Desmond teaches is that the easiest way is to substitute something else. So another fear object, another authoritarian. So we can look for that we would see the rise of some other entity that would distract everyone. And once people are in that kind of fear loop, they become very susceptible to that type of suggestion and manipulation. But longer term, what I keep counseling is in just to Clint's point about what it would take for the United States, I think that the United States is not monomorphic. We have a bicoastal United States, and then we have the pejorative of the flyover states. That rural America is a different place. It's a different place in terms of food supply. It's a different place in terms of self-reliance. It's a different place in terms of virtuals versus physicals. In rural America, we live a very different life. I say we because I live in rural Virginia, and I don't think that we would see in my community the same type of short-term response that we would see, say, up the road in Washington, D.C. In terms of what do we do to free ourselves from this, it's fascinating to go back, and we've written multiple Substacks about this, to go back and look at the Victory Gardens. The Victory Garden movement during both World War I and World War II got to the point where the general populace was producing more agricultural goods than were coming out of the established farms and agribusiness structure. A decentralized production of food is how we free ourselves. That and freeing ourselves from the debt is how we get out of this indentured servitude loop. So, for instance, one of the easiest things to do, and I suspect it's still not so hard in Canada, chickens. Chickens are incredible in terms of their ability to feed you. I've got way more eggs than I can deal with here. They go to the dogs. Despite all of the fear around the chicken massacres that are going on because of H5N1. So I think that building community, actively seeking out connections, physical connections, personal connections with the people around you, because that's one of the predicates is social isolation that enables this. And I live, we used to call our Substack, Who is Robert Malone? It was a reference to Who is John Galt, in part because I kind of live on Galt's Gulch. And if I don't know if Ayn Rand is as popular in Canada as it is in the United States, but I think the pathway forward is to return to self-reliance. And this was also a core part of Canadian culture historically. Canadians, the Monty Python joke, I am a lumberjack and I don't care. But there was a truth to that, right? Canadians or red-green, remember? I can fix anything with duct tape. Canadians have a history of being rugged individualists and self-reliant. I think you need to reach back to that culture and to celebrate it and to try to rekindle it as much as possible. The idea of a decentralized world that Clint, I think, is probably a strong advocate for, is the way we break the back of globalism, is we return to self-reliance and decentralization, and this principle that a decision should be made at the most local competent level. That was the core tenet behind the U.S. Constitution. And I think there's still a lot of merit to that idea. So that, I think, is how we free ourselves from this kind of globalist tyranny, is reinvest and recommit to community and to self-reliance and to productive labor, physical productive labor. The other day, I heard a lecture from Mike Rowe at CPAC, the dirty jobs guy. We have a deficit of millions and millions of jobs that are going unclaimed in the United States for people that actually work with their hands. And many of these jobs, like HVAC people, are strong six-figure jobs. But we've celebrated the virtual life We've celebrated the importance of the university education. We've demeaned people who actually work for a living and do things with their hands. But that is what made Canada strong. That's what made the United States strong. And if we want to free ourselves from the grip of these folks that think of everything in terms of dollars and cents and economics and cash flow, et cetera, we want to free ourselves from their grip. Return to self-reliance. That's my counsel.
Love it.
Yeah, and as a homesteader that homeschools off grid, I couldn't agree with you more. And what we're
My
seeing
people.
around here, yeah, right out, brother. And what we see around here is they're even cracking down on chickens. They won't let you have more than 4, so they've absolutely targeted exactly what you're saying, Dr. Malone, because they know how much food a chicken can provide. So they're not even making it legal anymore. You can't even have
Crazy.
more than 4 chickens. And this is, they're also doing this with water, Clint. They're putting in smart meters that actually shut off your water, not just meter it. You can actually shut off your water. So they're targeting water.
Get the hell out of the city,
Exactly, but they're going after wells.
This does not go anywhere good.
Yeah,
You're
it's
right,
super
but they're
dangerous.
going after wells even in rural areas. You have to register it or you could be charged. Now, you mentioned, Dr. Malone, a rise of something. So, Michael, let me ask you, J.D. Vance, one of his first speeches after becoming the vice president, he went to the AI Security Summit and said, look, we need to focus on opportunity and not so much safety. And that put chills down my spine. Like, I'm really for, trying to develop and understand things, but to take the safety rails off for the opportunity gave me a bit of a chill. Could this be the rise that maybe Dr. Malone's talking about, the rise of AI?
I was just on a long call, 2.5 hours, and they talked about with some AI experts, actually. And that's not my field, so I'm going to be very careful saying much about that, other than it's coming our way. But again, it's not my field, so I'm just cautious. I had a friend that just was up in Memphis, just spent a week up there. Actually, we were down in Panama researching here, and he headed up to that data center to research that. The things that are going on with this are just enormous, but I don't understand them well enough to say much.
No problem, but that's something we definitely have to keep an eye on because it seems to be a global initiative now, and I understand a lot of countries that were worried about it. But if they continue to put safety rails on while the U.S. and other countries are not, they're just going to fall behind. So I see a whole bunch of people go ahead and do that.
It's clearly weaponizable. I mean, I was talking with one AI guy recently, and he was talking about how his system could, basically take every book in the world, like the Library of Congress. Speaking of which, the Library of Congress, I love their website, but it doesn't work anymore. Worth of crap. I mean, I used Library of, I'm probably like one of their big users, but so I asked this guy that's in the AI world, I said, listen, so you got all these gazillions of books in your AI. Can you make me a map of the Darien Gap of all the historical paths down there and just kind of overlay them on each other, like make a heat map, something useful that I can actually use. He's like, no, we can't do that. I know that day is coming, but it doesn't seem to be there on making me a map for the Darien Gap yet, though, unfortunately.
I know we're running out of time. I just want to, since I rarely get to talk to this many Canadians, as I told you, Jason, I probably only have 1,000, consistent Canadian listeners on Liberty Lockdown. But I just want to implore you guys to, sure, maintain your kind spirits and your gentle spirits. I love it. It's like, I'm not hating on you at all. But I will say this. These people are trying to, and by these people, I mean your politicians, are trying to make it so you can't defend yourself, so you can't speak your mind, so that you can't feed yourself, so that you can't store wealth. They are trying to destroy you. At some point, you have to recognize these people are, in fact, your existential enemies. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to just curse at them and that's going to change everything. I'm just saying there is a point at which you must stand up for yourselves and you must do away with the kindness veneer and speak plainly and just let them know that this will not stand, and let your friends, your family, your neighbors know the same. I think that is the primary thing that disturbed me so much about the lockdown era, is that so few people were willing to just speak their mind. Because of the show I had so many people reaching out to me saying, you're keeping me sane because nobody in my life is talking like you are about how insane everything is right now and how un-American everything is and how dangerous everything is. And I don't want these mandates, and I don't want to take this jab, and I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do that. But they're not saying it in their day-to-day life. If you just speak your mind, you will find kindred spirits in this fight. And the more of us do that, the more our numbers seem real, and the more the people in power will have to relent. And I just cannot implore Canadians, particularly in this lane, more, because the Americans, we still have a bit of a fuck you, don't tell me what to do type of spirit, but I have not seen that so much from Canadians.
I got a big bit of that, real big.
Yeah, you and me both, brother. I think that's why my podcast does well. But I just, that is like, the whole world needs it. I'm not just lecturing Canadians here. Everybody needs to start speaking their mind and just being honest with their loved ones. I think if we do that, we'll be about halfway done with this fight.
I think you're right about that. And courage is contagious. And as you saw in Canada, very Canadian of us to go ahead and protest right in the middle of winter in late January, early February, the coldest time in Canada. And we went out there and did that. We still have Canadians in jail for that one. They were beaten. We had vets who were injured that were beaten. But Canadians are very resilient. And I hope that they're hearing this message. But again, courage is courageous. Can you all please hold on? We're going to say goodbye to the public and go answer a couple questions with our members. But if you don't mind, just hang on for a second. We'll do a quick little video and cut over. Public, share this out, especially if you're in Canada. What we heard here is there's a big octopus that's got a lot of tentacles that are dealing with Canada in a bunch of different ways. And it's not just Canada, as Michael highlighted. It's all over the place. And keep an eye on Thailand. Like, as he said, there may be some issues coming up there. But make sure you share this out. And why do we do these kind of shows for you? It's because we love you all very much. And we're not sponsored by anybody. So if you want to help us out, you can go to thelevineshow.com and become a member and contribute to keeping the show alive. So public, take care of yourself and your family. You make sure you shake the hand of a neighbor or a stranger. And why do I keep reminding you about this? It's because I love you all very much, and God bless. All right, folks, that's a wrap on the public portion of today's show. Thank you for watching. If you found this valuable, please share it with friends and family. Want to connect with the Lavigne Show community? Become a free member today and join the vibrant space dedicated to champion justice, accountability, and open dialogue. Engage with myself and fellow advocates, and stay in the loop on our latest broadcasts. Oh, not sure. All right, folks, that's a wrap on the public portion of today's show. Thank you for watching. If you found this valuable, please share it with friends and family. Want to connect with the Lavigne Show community? Become a free member today and join the vibrant space dedicated to champion justice,